What's up, guys? Welcome back to the basement. Nathan, Toolbox, Bert. Tonight we are going to do a quick video on something that I have had requested a couple times. It's something that a lot of us have to deal with, and I think it's probably going to be kind of the starter episode to a few basic walkthroughs on stuff. What we're going to do tonight is how to remove, disassemble, and reseal a standard WGP RAM. Now there's lots of different variables. There's a lot of different RAMs out there to work with. There's really only a few different styles as far as the internals of the RAM. There, I really think there's about 3 or 4 that you're ever going to really encounter much. There's a few out there that aren't rebuildable, but the one that we're going to cover tonight is going to be just a standard WGP RAM. Now, the last gentleman that I talked to that kind of sparked making this video, and actually he's going to be the one I'm going to be sending it to try to help him out, was asking because he's working on a trilogy at his shop, and it had been a couple years, and so I figured, you know what, this is something we all have to deal with, and something that a lot of us struggle with. Some parts of it do take practice. So what I'm probably going to do, shift the camera around just a little bit so that we have a little bit better view of the table here, and we're going to break this down, show you how to get it off the marker, how to break down the RAM itself, and how to reseal everything. So give me just a second. Alright, so a little bit closer view. Like I said, we're going to be working with a trilogy. The trilogy RAMs are obviously the same as pretty much any other WGP RAM. There are a couple proprietary things to these, but we'll cover that a different time if we're doing a trilogy video in specific. So the first thing we have to do is obviously remove the RAM from the body. So first thing, we're going to go ahead and take off our hoses. Hopefully, sometimes they can get a little stiff. You have to wrestle them off. If you can't get one off, and you're planning on replacing the hoses anyway, which is always a good idea, you can always split the hose with a razor blade. If you can't quite get on there, you can rotate the RAM a little bit. Try to get yourself a little pick and possibly get underneath there. Sorry if a lot of this takes me more time than usual. I'm trying to give a decent view of it, failing miserably. But anyway, we're going to pull the hoses off. Now this is something, especially if you're working with a really nice gun or a fresh anno or pretty much anything that's not a trilogy that you'll care about scratching the anno on. Either round off the tip of your pick so you're not going to scratch anything, or just split the hose and pull it off. Don't wrestle it, don't scratch your anno. Hose is cheap, okay? So, this one being a trilogy, we obviously have to get this barb out of the way here. And that one. We have to get that out of the way so that we can spin the RAM off. So you can do it with a small wrench or whatever you would like. Personally, I keep a little 3/16 quarter drive socket here on the cutest little 1/4-inch drive ratchet. And that is an average size for most barbs. There's some obvious exceptions there. So we're going to pull that barb off, and I guess leave it in there for right now. We're going to pull our pin out, remove our cocking rod, get some crap out of the way, pull the bolt out, spin off our back block, and now we're ready to actually remove the RAM from the body. So sometimes these will just be finger tight, sometimes they'll be put on there with just an O-ring buffer. Sometimes there's bad people out there who Loctite them into the front block, but that's why we're going to cover a couple small things you might want to take into account when you're disassembling. In another one of my videos, I talked about how sometimes, we were talking about some tools that I keep on the bench, and I do keep 2 different sizes of torch, just butane torches on hand. And this is one of the small things that it comes in handy for, because again, like I've mentioned in another video before, the connection between the ram arm and the pump arm itself is the one place on any of these markers that I will actually use red Loctite, because it's just something I really, really don't want coming loose. So we've now removed our ram. This one actually has decent suction. It's probably one that doesn't, yeah, got decent pressure on both sides. Probably doesn't need rebuilt, but we're going to check it out anyway. So I set the body to the side, and if we feel between that ram arm and pump arm, obviously that's not just going to break loose. So you could take a couple pliers and go to it. See, that's still not just going to break loose like I've covered before. Smooth jaw pliers are absolutely wonderful to have, and this is one of the biggest times that I use them. 90% of the time, like I said, this joint here between the ram arm and the pump arm typically has at least a little bit of red Loctite in it. So I'm going to start our little butane torch. And you can do this with a smaller one. I just like this bigger one because I don't have to use 3 hands. And we just want to heat up by that joint. You may notice a little bit of discoloration. Not a big deal. If it's a steel pump arm, we can work it out. If it's an aluminum pump arm, it's not going to damage it that bad. It'll be fine. Basically what you're looking for, you can see how there's a little bit of flame and a little bit of smoke coming up out of that joint. And if you're familiar with red Loctite, you will know that smell of kind of like burning cherries. Once it's hot enough, you should be able to grab the ram arm and just twist the pump arm off, which is exactly what we're doing here. So we're going to spin that off. Both ends of this are going to be real hot. Set that to the side. So that is nice and hot. That is nice and hot. And now we have our ram free from our pump arm. So what we're going to do here, and this is another point that you kind of have to look out for the previous builder, but occasionally you will find that the ram tube has been locked to the base of the ram with a little bit of red Loctite. Again, not a good idea. It doesn't need to be. There's absolutely no reason for it. Red Loctite is the devil. So in this case, we're gonna try. We're gonna see if we can get it apart. Basically, what I'm doing here is, if you take and think about where the other end of this ram arm is, on the other end of this, there's a decent sized brass piston that almost meets the walls of this ram. So if we take that and push it all the way in, our brass piston is going to be up in here. What we're going to do is squeeze on that tube. Now this is not a mar-free operation. On occasion it does leave some marks, but if we take and hold on to the front where we're mostly squeezing on that piston, we can minimize the damage to this tube if there will be any. I'm going to take the small adjustable wrench, hit the back, and this one, is pretty tight. So, get our torch back out. Go ahead and get a hold of our one end. And again, we're just going to heat that connection. Now, moving your flame a little bit will help to minimize the damage to your anodizing. And of course, being careful not to be too close to it. You don't have to heat all the way around. You really just want to heat in one sort of spot. As you heat metal, it expands, so if you heat all the way around, there's potential for this to give a little bit more squeeze onto those threads as the aluminum expands, because the aluminum is going to transfer heat much faster than the steel base will. Get that nice and hot. Got a little bit of smoke coming out. There we go. Like I said, this is one that was attached with red Loctite, which is the devil. As we can see here, all this old red Loctite. So very carefully spin that base Don't drop the base. Bad dad joke. I'm going to just yank all this assembly out. Set our RAM tube to the side. And now we can take a look at what all is going on inside our RAM. Let's see if we can kind of squeeze this in a little. Okay, so if we look here, we have three basic components. Okay, so we have the tube itself, we have the RAM shaft with the brass piston, and we have the base of the RAM. Get a little better shot. There you go. Tube, shaft, piston, base of RAM. Okay? This up a little. There we go. So the first thing we're going to do, as always, we've got a ton of Q-tips going on. So we're going to scrub this thing out. A little bit of funk. Just keep going till it's clean. A little bit of alcohol to help the scrubbing. A little bit of alcohol helps all tech work. That's good enough. Then, here's kind of the important part. After we've already made sure that our tube is completely clean, we're going to look down there and check, make sure everything's fine. There's a few things we want to check with our RAM shaft. So, as you see, shaft itself, threaded portion, bumpers on both sides. These are just a urethane disc basically, and then we have an O-ring right here on the piston. This is a number 10 O-ring, but right now what we want to talk about are these bumpers. So when you get these out, sometimes they look fine. What you want to do is honestly try to take a chunk out of it. Dig your nail into it and try to take a chunk out of that bumper, because if it will give now, it's sure as hell going to give when you take it out onto the field and you're beating the crap out of it. So, like this for example, this is a bumper that came out of a RAM I did just last week, I believe it was. Looks just fine. The urethane is still pretty clear. No, major cracks or anything like that. But the urethane, if I just pinch this with my fingernail, it comes off in chunks. Okay, this urethane has gone soft. Whether someone put a solvent through this gun or a wrong oil, if you put gun oil, actual firearm oil through these, that's a bad idea. Either way, this RAM bumper has gone soft. So you need to check your bumpers while you're here. These can cause you trouble on down the road if you don't check them. So, we're also going to take a quick look at the shaft. A little bit here. Just scooch it out. Okay, so, like we talked about before, I don't exactly have a lathe laying around, but we need to be able to check whether this shaft is bent or anything. We can go ahead and address that now. So, power drill, we're going to chuck this in here two different ways. The first way, we're going to take the piston itself and put it in. It's not a bad idea to go ahead and pull the O-ring off. Chuck that in there. Try and make sure you get it centered. Okay. So there, for example, you can see we have a bit of bend. So, first thing we're going to do, you can turn it sideways, watch for your up and down, and as it hits that very most upward point, make your adjustments. Okay, so that's not all that bad. A lot of that's going to come from just some wiggle available at the piston. Now we're going to chuck it in the other way. And you want to try to get towards the tip of the threads. Now you don't want to really clamp down on this. You're probably not going to hurt the threads, but it's not worth risking. So if we look at it here, you can see we have a lot of bend, but we can identify where it's at. You can see it's right in this portion. You can see that's where our bend is originating from. So we can do, loosen this up just the tiniest bit, chuck it just a little bit closer to where our bend is originating. And we can see, so again, we're down, up. We can make our tweak a little less. So we've already basically halved the wobble or the offset or the bend in this particular shaft. Pretty damn close. Good enough for a reseal video. So, want to make sure there's no gouges in the ram shaft. And we're good there. The only thing that we're going to do now that we've checked our bumpers and everything else is swap out our O-ring. This is a 010 or a number 10 O-ring in a 70 durometer. Okay, so that's what this is on here. Put that in. Now comes the fun part. Inside the ram base here, roughly right in this area just below the port for the barb, is a number 6 O-ring, 006. So a little bit bigger than standard 3-way O-ring, which is 003. You're going to need a dental pick and some patience. Okay, so slip down in. You're going to want a half decent angle there. Slip down until you feel the O-ring groove, kind of push into the wall, and then down. Okay, so you should be burying that pick into that O-ring. Now we're going to keep pushing down a little bit, pull backwards towards the center of the hole, and then push down again into the hole. And try to get our pick loose. And sometimes it will go ahead and jump at least a little bit out. That time we got really lucky. And there's our O-ring. So that it just takes practice. Don't get frustrated. As long as you've got a good thin pick with a little bit of angle on it, you'll be okay. It just takes a little practice, and every once in a while you get lucky. So like I said, that is a number 6, 006. So going back in, a little bit of oil on our 006. You're going to kind of squeeze it and slip it into the hole. And just push it in there relatively flush. Now one thing that I've found works really well for me, and again, this is just when it works, it works, okay? Take your ram shaft and gently kind of poke that down, and typically what will happen is one side or the other will fold a little bit and will start to catch that O-ring groove. So we're just going to smush it, okay? Just, it's going to feel kind of like you're packing it down into there, okay? So that, I highly doubt I'm going to get a shot of this. Yeah, you can see our O-ring halfway seated itself just by poking it, okay? Be gentle, because there are some sharp points on the bottom of those threads, but it halfway seated itself just like that. Then I'll usually take a straight pick, not a dental pick, one a little bit fatter, kind of watch where you're poking, see which way you need to push from, and just gently work her down into there, just like that. Now we are all the way in and reseated. So going back together, ram shaft, push it in here, just a little twist, make sure none of the threads are going to snag. It never hurts to put a tiny bit of oil, just, you know, the residue on your fingers here and on the other side. This is going to be contacting that O-ring, so a little oil helps. Here at the base, these threads, we're not going to put red Loctite back in them. We're going to put a couple drops of blue Loctite. Red Loctite doesn't belong there. Just a couple drops. If you want, you can just run. Make sure you have a very thin continuous bead all the way around. We're going to put a little bit of oil, a couple drops onto our ram piston. Slip everything together. Thread these back together. Now we're at this point. Now again, we're going to squeeze our ram tube just a little bit, and we're going to give just a little bit of a squeeze on the base. Don't need to bury this into there, just get it snug. We'll go around, wipe off any excess Loctite, and there we are. We have rebuilt a WGP ram. You guys have any kind of questions? Anything else you want to know? Let me know.